Welcome, 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 everyone. This is A Life on Purpose, live, grounded in the foundations of Ikigai, where we bring you educational content in the form of interviews. Today, please have something to write with, record this episode. This is going to be phenomenal. We have the founder of Gene Keys in the house, Richard Rudd. This is going to be an amazing interview. Before we get started with all of that, if you're not following yet, this is Lena's channel. Please go ahead and follow the channel. Click the little button right next to it so that you get all the information and updates of when she has all the popping information so you can know what's going on. As you can see, Lena's not right here next to me. As most of you know, we had like a little baby. So we're going to see us on and off as we live this purposeful life of ours and kind of live what we preach and steady the foundations of our own family. But enough of that. So, man, I'm so excited to have Richard here with us today. This guy is amazing. Watkins' list of 100 most influential spiritual people alive on the planet today. He is a poet, a phenomenal author. I can't wait to dig into this book, The Art of Contemplation, and the founder of the Gene Keys Synthesis. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll bring on Richard Rudd.
Hi, Peter. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, your volume is perfect. You're looking fantastic. And I love the stained glass that you have on the side there.
Yeah, I know. People enjoy it. I enjoy it too.
Right. It actually looks like you're in a church somehow.
Yeah, not exactly, but yes, it is my little kind of eyrie where I sort of have my deep thoughts and contemplations.
Beautiful, beautiful. I just wanted to say shout out to everyone watching us live. I know we have quite a few people here from the Mind Valley tribe joining us. So shout out to the Mind Valley tribe. Please leave some comments on the side. We'll get to it. If you have a question directly for Richard, please go ahead and put some in there. So we won't be diving too much into the Gene Keys. Today, Richard, if that's okay with you, we'll kind of stick to the art of contemplation, but we kind of have to do some macro to micro to get to the art of contemplation. I think we kind of need to have a full spectrum of what this is about. But before we get into that specifically, I actually want to know a little bit more about you, Richard Rudd, the human, like, were you always, spiritual as a child? Like, did you grow up in a spiritual home? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, no, I didn't grow up in a particularly spiritual home at all. Well, only in the sense that I had loving parents. And my parents were loving to each other and to us kids, although they were away a fair amount. My father was a wine and spirit merchant. He traveled all around the world. And my mum went with him a lot. So we were alone quite a bit and had nannies, but we had a very good, English traditional upbringing, privileged, good schools, those kind of things. I had a very good education. So I'm incredibly fortunate. And then a little bit of inheritance as well, which I used mostly in my 20s, traveling the world. So I didn't do what everyone else did at that point. I did a lot of traveling. That's sort of when things turned on inside me in my early 20s, and I was a bit of a wanderer.
So you traveled a bit. It was that app. Did your parents pass or something like that?
No. I just had some kind of money that came to me, and instead of, I guess, frittering it away, I just use it to travel. I mean, I got bitten by that bug of like, I traveled, all over the world whenever I could. And I would hone in on a place. Like if I go, right, I want to go to South America. I've never been to South America. And I would just choose one country and just go there really, on my own. And I just go really deep into the culture of that country. I wanted to know. So for instance, that I went to Bolivia that time, and I just went right out into the back country and just immersed myself in that culture and the language and the people. And I learned a huge amount from doing that, from those wandering years. I went, all over the world. I even went to the Arctic and had lots of adventures and met some incredible people, as you do when you have that kind of, when you're lucky enough to be able to travel like that. So it really formed a lot of my kind of inspiration, I think. But I didn't really know at the time that's what I was doing. I was just fueling myself with, what it is to be a human, and what it is to be alive, and what it is to relate. And so that was a big part of my kind of early, development, I guess.
Right. It's so interesting that you talked about your travels, how that impacted your life, and really how you designed the gene keys. Because I remember doing some research as I was just looking into your program, and it turns out that actually the act of traveling, just traveling to a new destination, immersing yourself in a new culture, immersing yourself in new languages, new foods, it actually turns on different aspects of your genes that were normally dormant, which I found like so fascinating. Did you experience any of that, or did that influence you at all into developing your work?
Definitely. I mean, the mystical kind of side of life kind of crept into me, because I had so many synchronicities. When you're open like that and you don't really have a set plan, synchronicity abounds. And as you say, you go to places and you have a distinct sort of smell that you almost remember these places, and then it's almost as if there are people waiting for you at times. I mean, I remember being in the jungle in Guatemala once, and I was in a little kind of cafe, and I was chatting away in Spanish to some local guy who was like the vigilante, the night watchman of the pyramids, and I said I'd love to go there at night when it's closed and no one's allowed in. And he said, "Come on, I'll take you." And then he took me up to this, in the Tikal, in the Peten, and he took me up to this pyramid number 4, which is the big one. And we were up on the top, and I said, "Can you just leave me up here?" And he said, "Yeah, for sure, it's no problem," and he just left me up there all night. And I had this amazing night where I just thought, I've been here before. I know this place. I know, I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the smell, the jungle, and those experiences happened a lot to me, where just things felt like they were just laid out. And I realized deep in my cells that there was a, I guess you call it the Tao, or the way. There was a flow built into life, and a trust. And my Dharma, as I later learned about, was unraveling before me. And if I was able to surrender, I mean, it wasn't all easy. There were difficult times for sure.
Right.
But yeah, it was that kind of a learning from traveling, and as you say, just imbibing cultures and foods and people.
Right. It's so interesting. You mentioned the Tao De Jing, right? And the author being Lao Tzu. He spoke about it in, I think it's like the first chapter, that said the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. And that's such a powerful thing, right? Because our words, our vocabulary is based on the scientific method, right? There's nouns, verbs, and this has to go after that in these rules. But that's not actually what we see in reality. That's not actually there. I don't really think we have the capacity to describe all that we see in reality. I just want to follow the narrative of your story leading into your mystical experience, right?
Yeah.
Your travels. Although you probably cannot describe it into words, what could you tell us about that leading up to it? How did this whole transformational process?
Well, I did become interested in meditation and things like that. And I went to study with several teachers in different places. Taoists actually seem to be one of my things. And a wonderful man called Hua Qing Ni, Master Ni, who wrote amazing, hundreds of books, and a very notable book on the I Ching. And was a 74th generation master in his lineage, like incredible lineage. And his sons now have taken over, and they're somewhere in California, Santa Monica, I think. And an amazing golden orb of a man. The classic Chinese master with a little beard, and they're just very beautiful and just incredible energy. I fell in love with him. And then another teacher who many people will have heard of, Mantak Chia. I was one of his early students, Master Chia, who's completely different, a master of techniques, and a sort of riotous man, quite kind of mad. And a mix of Christian values and Buddhist and Zen and kind of all kinds of, and Taoist, and all these techniques he'd learned from people, mysterious name people like the White Cloud Hermit, who he'd studied with, and then shared all these teachings in his books, secret teachings that have been secret for thousands of years, and the people were very annoyed with him. But I studied with amazing people like that, and that's where I learned kind of the art of meditation, and it led, I didn't, in an unexpected thing happened in my late 20s, where I woke up one morning, and as far as I know, I haven't heard another story similar to this, but I woke up from sleep into an awakened state. So I actually just woke up and I was awake. I was double awake. So I'd just gone to sleep normally the night before, and then I woke up, and I was like, oh my God, this is life. This is it. This is, I was like, I know this. And for 3 days and 3 nights, that state of illumination persisted. And I didn't sleep actually at all. I just kind of, I moved around in those 3 days. I went on a pilgrimage throughout Great Britain and England, and ended up in Wales, and just following again the Tao. And I was being taught, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but through the intelligence of the field of light that was what I was, and the sort of Richardness had gone, and there was just this light field, and I guess the feeling I have and had was zero resistance in my body, in my being, zero resistance. I'd never, I don't know if anyone here has ever had an experience like that, but where you feel zero resistance, suddenly it's all just taken away. And it was an incredible experience, and then it all came back after 3 days. Like, it's like it kind of fell off me. I was sitting on this hilltop in Wales on an island, and that experience literally just sort of melted off me and fell back into the earth. That was my experience, like a kind of shawl that just fell off me and then melted back into the earth, and I was left as Richard Rudd, but different forevermore. Right. And I spent a long time trying to integrate what the hell just happened, and I went through lots of different experiences. I went through a Messiah phase of a few months. So I just thought, I'm it. It seems to be obligatory, that one. And then I went through a denial phase. That was complete nonsense. It didn't really happen. It was just, I hadn't taken anything. It was just a spontaneous experience. And so I went through lots of different struggles and things with it, and eventually, after about 7 years, things started to settle inside me and kind of form and crystallize into a set of teachings, which in time became the Gene Keys. Based on the I Ching, funnily enough, but very loosely. I
had never heard you told the story quite that way before.
No.
I'm so glad I asked you to explain it, because I read it, how you described it in your writings about your experience. I've heard you talk about this in glimpses on interviews before that I watched with you, but never in this way. That's quite intriguing.
Yeah, it comes out differently every time I remember.
That's why before, I know you guys, weren't really on the back end conversation. Those who are watching it live on the replay, I was telling Richard that I really appreciate the fact that he didn't really, nag me about what I was going to ask him, because I actually don't know. I just kind of show up to the interview with an open heart and an open mind, and just kind of let it flow. And I'm so glad I just left that to kind of take form.
Well, that's the way to live, isn't it?
Right. It's the last time we talked was about a year ago, like this on a video chat. We stayed communicative in emails and so forth, and I've been greatly appreciative of the mentorship that you've provided. And you've done so in tremendous ways, even in the minute things that you may say. You may say it in passing, but it's not in passing to me. I take it, as kind of like a message. So I don't know if you remember the first time we spoke, you spoke to me about this knife edge. You spoke with me about the knife edge. When you come to this type of understanding, or when you come to the precipice, there's kind of like a knife edge where you can step into that ecstasy you described, or you can step into anxiety and depression, like you also described, right? It's kind of like a knife edge of a situation. The interesting thing that I found was that there's a word, nirvana, that has some really intriguing, etymology. It's really difficult to define, but I looked into it, and the transcript definition of it kind of means like blowing out a candle, or X, which is desperation, which is when you get to that line of desperation, when you get to that point where everything has been either taken from you, or you've had enough with life, or you have even come to the point, like myself, of even being, suicidal to some extent, where you've come to the point of everything has been taken from you. Now you may be ready to step into that path of nirvana, or step into that aspect of desperation. Why do you think, or is that congruent with your understanding of this state of where people find spirituality, or find this awakening, just like the great Buddha? It was, Gautama the Buddha. It was when he finally gave up this esoteric living of starving himself and so forth, and just sat, that, the wonder, the mysticism came upon him. Do you have some type of understanding of that, or an experience of it? And can you talk to us about that a little bit, about why is it that we have to come to that knife edge, or what's the significance of it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Peter. Thank you. Well, I was talking with a very wise elder recently, and we were sort of riffing, and we came to this conclusion that the edge is in the middle. We thought it would be a great name for a book, actually, The Edge in the Middle.
I need to write that down.
And we laughed about that, because it is between the extremes, and this is exactly what the Buddha, of course, taught, the middle way and all that, and we hear it a lot. But actually, finding it in your everyday life is the only way to really know it. And as you know from being a father now, integration of spiritual kind of awakenings, or awareness, or sort of little epiphanies, or just breakthroughs, takes place usually in just kind of quite a ordinary, way, in that, because most of our life isn't like that. Most of our life isn't those kind of nirvanic states, unless you're very, blessed in some way. So a lot of life is actually just integrating, happy moods, sad moods, and that underneath, that underlying consciousness that we are. So every time, and as you know, because I know we're going to talk about contemplation soon, but it's a pulsing of states of awakening with states of kind of integration, so for me, my integration really took place when I became a father and a husband, and then I was, that, interestingly enough, that was the timing, like when things started to kind of crystallize for me. Previous to having those, to having that, I was still quite lost. But then as soon as I found my wife and we had children, like that's when everything started to make sense inside me.
Right.
But I can't exactly say how. I started to embody what it is to be a kind of a fuller human being. For me, it doesn't mean you have to have kids, but that's what did it for me. It enabled me to ground this kind of heightened state and really get it into, everyday reality. And in a way, I had to do it because everyday reality was quite monotonous and quite hard work and quite boring. And, it's like, and, full of responsibilities and all those things. And so I kind of needed to have that sort of edge in the middle where the heightened state met the kind of ordinary state. And then in the middle is this beautiful crystal knife edge where we can live, actually. And so that then became, so I walked that knife edge as best I could for many years. I still am. And it's made me, I think, a fuller, more wholesome human, because I don't kind of fly off into transcendent states all the time. And I don't even seek that anymore. And I also don't kind of wallow down in the suffering, although I have suffering just like everyone else. Right. So I might have an argument with my wife one day, or some, some big challenge comes up in my working life or something, or a relationship issue that's just, really dogging me. And those things come up, but then they're also integrated in some way in this art of contemplation. And they're brought into that center, and it's a mysterious thing, but it works. And also those, one thing I'd also say is that when people talk about words like nirvana or ecstasy, for me, they include that state includes those extremes. It can include depression. It can include sadness. It can include great joy. Ecstasy isn't for me this heightened state at one end of a spectrum. It's actually the full spectrum itself, fully embodied, nothing left out, no resistance, and that's our challenge. That's just letting it all in. And, that's what this art of contemplation is. That's where it sort of begins.
I had to kind of exhale as you said that, to be honest, because that question was very personal to me, trying to understand it. And I think really it's just like you said, it wasn't until really I met my partner, Lena, that I really started to understand what was happening to me in the same right. I can't really explain the type of mystical experience that you had in that way. It was just one day I felt like I was ready to share what I had gained, and I never kind of went back into that state of where I felt like I needed to be isolated from the world, because I felt like I needed to take myself away from the world because I couldn't talk to anyone about what I was feeling, what I was experiencing. And it actually felt a little bit like insanity to me. And I had to do like a lot of physical practices for me that really helped me. The yoga, it helped me to somehow loosen it in my physical body so that my mind could somehow understand it or take it into the world. As we talk about that, taking it into the world, and I feel like your work does a lot of that to help people understand it for themselves, what type of experience they're having and how to put it into a type of synthesis. I know that the Gene Keys is based on some fundamental principles, contemplation being one of them. As we move through getting into contemplation, could you talk about the fundamental principles and the specific aspect that contemplation plays in your Gene Keys?
Yeah. So yeah, the Gene Keys are, that they were my contemplation of the Chinese I Ching, right? Based on the I Ching, and that I was really interested in that. And I didn't read a lot of the I Chings. I read Master Ni's version, and I recommend that if you want a traditional version. And then I just kind of discarded everything I knew, and I went into this, contemplation of each one of those hexagrams, as they were called, because what I was experiencing in that heightened state of consciousness was that the light, that intelligence of light was actually coming from my DNA. It was actually pouring out of my DNA and through it. And I had that experience. Like I thought, wow, that's what DNA is. It's just a transducer of light. and everything is kind of recorded in there, in that light field, and it's intelligent, and it connects to all other forms as well, even through time and space, the quantum field, and all of that, those insights. So yeah, the 64 codes of DNA were understood traditionally through this Chinese, I Ching, which has 64 symbols, as you know. And so I really wanted to understand them inside me. So I kind of put everything aside, and I just took them one at a time at random. And then I really contemplated each one, and its structure as a sort of symbol. And I looked for its meaning inside me. And as I was contemplating it, I looked in my life around me. And it showed up. A theme or a pattern would show up, and until it showed up, I didn't kind of let it go until I understood it. And what came for me is I was looking for words. So I was looking for a word for each of the states. And initially I was looking for gifts. So I wanted, what is the gift of this one, number 63? What is the gift? And I looked and I looked and I looked until I kind of realized that it was the gift of inquiry. The word would just crystallize and form, and I was like, that's the right word. It's about inquiry, self-inquiry, right? So I found those gifts, and then so I found all 64 gifts, and then I thought that, I was talking to a psychologist friend of mine, and he on the train once, and he said to me, I think those gifts also have shadows. And by shadows, he obviously meant the kind of the lower states. Like, so if there's a gift, there must be something under, there must be another state that isn't so nice underneath it. And so we sat down and we looked at all the shadow. We kind of unpicked the gifts, and we thought, well, what's underneath inquiry, for example? And then I found it was like doubt. Doubt is under inquiry, because doubt is the source, and inquiry is the logical mind, and inquiry is the scientific mind, and it starts with doubt. Like, I don't understand this. I need to understand it. I need to inquire into it to understand. And then, so I went through getting all those shadow words, and they also had more than one word. They had reactive and repressive aspects as well, depending on our psyche and our conditioning and culture. And so that formed a whole thing. And then I kind of thought that, because I like threes and trinities, and I thought there's got to be another word up at the top, which, it looks like it's up at the top, but actually it's right in the middle. The seed, or the fruit, So in a way, you had the shadow that was the seed, and then the gift, which was the flower. And then I looked for a word. There was essence was okay, but anyway, so I went to Sanskrit and I found the Sanskrit word siddhi. Which means divine gift or superpower. It can mean as well, but it's divine expression. So what I did there is, so in that case, I'll finish that example. Doubt, inquiry, and then the siddhi was truth. Truth, and then you get to see that's the spectrum: doubt, inquiry, truth. That's a whole journey. That's the journey of the Buddha. That's the journey of every human being: doubt, inquiry, truth. But it's actually a journey through the left brain, through reason. And then there was the 64, which was the opposite, and in the I Ching, they're come in binaries. And I thought, well, what's that one? And that was that was like the gift of imagination, so you had, like, on one side, doubt and inquiry. And then you had on the other side of the brain, the right brain, imagination. And underneath imagination is confusion, and then at the top is illumination. And I mentioned those two by random, but they have, in Gene Keys, we run profiles as well. And you can go on to genekeys.com, anyone, and you can get your free profile and look at it and see the gene keys that relate to you. And I call them gene keys. And there's 64 of them, and they have all these words. But those words give you a journey. And those two happen to be my kind of key words. I didn't, at the time, I guess I didn't know that, but I found that out later when I got into the profiling game. And yeah, so the Gene Keys then became this huge, I wrote the book of all, so I had those words and I wrote a book out of those words. I expanded them, I explained them, I described the journey of the shadow work to the gift to the siddhi. And what it did is it gave us a framework for understanding suffering as having a hidden blessing inside it.
Mm.
And so every aspect of suffering, whether it was confusion, conflict, there was all these words, these classic words for states of suffering that dog human beings, but they all had cities and gifts hidden inside them. So conflict became peace, through the gift of diplomacy, and everyone has a journey, and what it does is it changes your relationship to your own suffering, because it's at a fundamental neurological level. So as you read the Gene Keys book, or as you work with the programs, and there are lots of them now, then it's imprinting us, over time, with this understanding that all those difficult states are opportunities for growth, and that hidden inside each kind of lump of coal of misery is an incredible diamond if we can kind of find it, And the art of contemplation is how we unlock it. It's the how, and that's why it's my favorite subject, I guess.
What do you mean by how? Can you expand on that? Like how you get to that state? How you inquire?
How do you inquire? What is contemplation? How does this work? Is there something I can do? All those questions we have. How do I get to that state? How do I transform that lump of coal into a diamond? How do I extract that diamond?
I need that information.
Yeah. and the kind of modern mind is obsessed with how, right? Strategies. I got to have a strategy. So anyway, I didn't come up with it. It came out of my wisdom mind. I think it was given to me. Contemplation, there's a lovely word in, it's a character in Japanese, from the Japanese. There are many different characters for the word contemplation, but my favorite one is translated as light flashed through the mind. And that's what contemplation delivers. So the deeper you inquire into a certain subject, and it could be your suffering, or it could be something numinous, it could be a saint or something, the more you contemplate it, eventually some light flashes through your mind. And we do talk about illumination, we talk about epiphany, or we have these words for light connected to the mind, the light bulb going off in the brain, that kind of stuff. But the mind isn't just in the brain, the mind's the whole body. And so contemplation is this journey to unlock that light that's in our DNA. And it starts often with thinking, but it goes way deeper than thinking. It has levels and layers. Thinking is where you begin. So you think about something, and then that thinking goes deeper and deeper until it actually starts to move into the layers of our emotional life. And then it becomes feeling. So if you really are looking at conflict, for example, if you really want to understand a conflict in your life, and you train the lens of contemplation on a specific conflict, in the beginning, it might be a bit uncomfortable. You might just be thinking about it, and then you forget about it and you go about your day. But then it comes back every now and again, because contemplation is this gentle holding of a focus over a period of time until you have an epiphany. That's how it works. So I say you basically, you stay with it until you have an insight, until you get that flash through your mind and you get that bing. And that's I call that simply an insight, And if you contemplate something for long enough, you will always have an insight. And that insight is unforgettable, because it suddenly is this light that's flashed through your mind, and you suddenly realize that difficult thing is not as difficult as you thought. And your mind was building it into all these things. And then suddenly that light shines through, and all those difficult things have kind of been shown to you as your own creation. And that's when it moves to the next layer, which is the emotional layer, which I know I'll pause for a second, because I'd love to.
It's fine. This is beautiful. As you were talking, especially about, you were describing the gene keys, I just saw the yin and yang symbol. As you were describing, everything has a shadow, every up has down, every in has out, and you can't know one without the other. It can't exist without the other.
Yeah.
What do I really say after that, really? It's kind of just like a deeper understanding of that is reality. So even when we come up to, just talking about like things that are happening in the world right now, whether that be warfare and peace, whether that be, violence and tranquility, this understanding is really saying that they both must exist, and you cannot actually eradicate one without the other. Would that be a correct assumption? Is that the same thing as what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I wouldn't probably go as far to say that they can't, one end can't exist. But yeah, I think you're right, actually. They belong to each other. And they're the polarity that gives rise to that edge in the middle. And that edge in the middle is like the yin yang, is a constantly changing serpent path,
Right.
that we have to, navigate through our lives. But the art of contemplation gives us some very simple places to begin. And it's really only one technique. And the technique is so simple that any single human being, even a child, can learn it. And it's the art of pausing. And I know other teachers teach this as well. And it's about, what I call is harvesting pauses. So if you imagine yourself, if you're listening to this now and that you get to the end of your day, and if you think back to the times that you've had pauses in your day, if you have, then those are often the days where you breathe and you become aware of your breath and you become aware of your environment. And if you look at nature, you'll see that nature is filled with pauses everywhere, and creatures pause all the time. If you're watching a creature, even a fly, if you're watching a fly, it does that thing where it comes and it lands on you and then you brush it away, and then it comes back and it's like you brush it away and it's like, why is it doing that? What is it? I
really want to know the answer to that question.
Sorry? Yeah, what is in it for the fly? And in a way, I think the fly is telling you to pause, or it's reminding you to pause. And all nature reminds us to pause, because when we pause, we suddenly become more aware of our environment. So it's actually a survival mechanism for one thing, but it's also an emotional survival mechanism, because it puts us in touch with our breathing. It slows us down in our nervous system. It kind of it allows us often when someone pauses, you just take a deep breath and you sigh. You just sort of go, and we pause all the time, but actually creatively pausing and harvesting pauses, so finding the pauses as they come and then bringing them in. And I have a friend, I met a friend, and for example, who's a taxi driver, and he said this technique has just changed his life, because every time he comes to a red light, he now celebrates instead of feeling frustrated. And it's a bit like that, like you're walking down the street and one of those people comes at you with a clipboard, and you always sort of like rush past. But actually, if you're cultivating the art of contemplation, you seek those moments. You actually yield to them. You go, yeah, I'm not. You don't have to be in the least bit interested in what they have to say, but you take the pause anyway, and you give them that moment of courtesy, of like, you look in their eyes and you say, right. "Wow, that's interesting. That's really nice to. Thank you." And if you spend a few moments, and then you can move on. And contemplation is all about creating pauses, and pauses can also be moving. So when you bring it into movement, it becomes meandering. Or lovely words like lingering or sauntering. So in Gene Keys, in our community, we have a global community. We have a whole thing called lingering. So when we finished a talk or a webinar or something like that, there's always lingering. I'm done, and then I sit, and then I just hang out, and I might hang out for half an hour, and the best conversations happen then. It's the same at parties, right? You go to a dinner, so everyone leaves, and there's like 2 or 3 of you left, and it goes into the small hours, and those are where the magical things happen, because your guard's down, you're relaxed, you're not performing, you're not expecting. And that's the nature of contemplation. It's about that. It's about that gap space, but it's not about being overly sort of Zen. It's playful as well. It's very playful. So you can find pauses in lots of different ways. And when you create those pauses, it's in those pauses that magic happens. So a day filled with pauses, you get to the end of a day filled with pauses, you really feel like you've had a full day. You feel like you actually feel like you've pumped more time into that day,
Right.
because you've actually had less breaths. So you've actually extended your life as well,
Right.
because you've had less breaths, and you've pumped more time into the day. And how is that possible? To pause, you think you'd lose time, but you don't. So it's a kind of it's the entry point to contemplation, is the art of pausing, and it's very poetic, and it is an art. It's not it shouldn't become a discipline. If it becomes a discipline, then you've lost the spirit of the flow of contemplation, because it has to have a flow to it. It's very yielding. It's not like you're doing your mindfulness practice. It's sort of similar, and it has some similarities, but it's more of it fills your whole day. And even though you may forget for hours, then suddenly you remember, oh yeah, pause. And it
Can you talk about the differences between mindfulness, contemplation, meditation? I know you mentioned it in the book. I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I love, I look at those things, and mindfulness and meditation. Perhaps meditation is you could look at it, means so many things, doesn't it? One way of looking at meditation is like Vipassana meditation, where you're sitting and you're just watching, and you're doing nothing, and you're just watching the mind or watching the breath. And that's one end of the spectrum. And then you might take something like a yoga practice, where you're actually doing something, a concentration practice, where you're actually focusing the mind, or you're focusing the body, or you're doing a discipline, and so there's one end, which is the sort of, I guess, the tantra end, which is doing nothing, just surrendered, watching. And then there's the yoga end, which is doing something, doing a discipline. And then in the middle, the edges in the middle, is contemplation. And contemplation can borrow parts of either of those paths. If contemplation feels like doing a technique, it might pick up a technique and do it. If it feels like doing nothing, it might do nothing. It's very creative and proactive. So it is that kind of mindfulness, but it's more proactive than mindfulness. It's more generous in a way than mindfulness, because it's not really a technique. It's a state, it's a custom that we build into our life. So if you become over time a contemplative person, and many of the people listening to this probably already are, then you also become a relaxed person. And that doesn't mean, I have to say, it doesn't exclude difficult states.
Right.
So when difficult states come, like I get anxious at times, something comes or something happens, or sometimes you don't even know where anxiety comes from, right? It's just kind of there in your body one day. And when that happens, if you've built a contemplative practice, you have all this space that's around that. So you don't kind of react to it and panic, go into fear. You just give it space, to give it space, even though it's uncomfortable. And so because you create the pause around it, and then you can kind of look at it without kind of hoping it will, you may hope it goes away. That's very human.
Right.
So you allow as well. And you might do a technique. You might kind of not do a technique. You might ask for help. It doesn't matter. The fact is, the pause creates the space for you to not have to panic, and think, I'm stuck. I've got to get out of this. So you approach each of those difficult states in a very kind of lucid way.
Right.
And that's what makes all the difference. It's like you've surrounded it in cotton wool. So one of the things, like my little book on contemplation here, a little pitch for the book, it's very thin, by the way, is gentleness. Gentleness. I mention that a lot. It's about, if there's a discipline, it's the discipline of gentleness, towards oneself and others, but especially towards oneself, because we're so hard on ourselves. We're so judgmental. We're so, we expect and demand so much of ourselves. So that gentleness is like a kind of Christ energy that just comes and just sort of wraps itself around you, but you have to do it to yourself. So like you're in your, field where you're dealing with a lot of people with a lot of trauma. This is like a beautiful thing for
Right.
these people to learn, like the art of being gentle to oneself, to one's own difficulties. It's in the body, right? These traumas are in the
Right.
body.
Right.
So we actually have to kind of hold our bodies. We have to like touch them with our own hands and let that gentleness, that tenderness towards ourselves in deeper. And sometimes it can come from another person as well, of course. Gentle people, having gentle people around with a gentle spirit is incredibly healing.
I love how you brought in the fact that, to be contemplative, to be mindful, to be meditative, and to be in these states and to be in the middle does not mean that you don't encounter difficulty. It doesn't mean that you just somehow bypass challenges in life, because I think that's a really important thing to understand. Just like you were talking about, the yin and the yang, the up and the down, the in and the out, they must coexist, or else you cannot understand without the other. The darkness is only in perspective when there's light, and vice versa. So I think that's a really interesting thing. Your book actually changed the way how I swept the house, just to let you know that.
How do you do it now?
In a state of contemplation, because it talked about that. I found this out when I was really studying Buddhism, when I think that was about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was trying to understand what was happening to me. I started to explore the different teachings and so forth. And there's a teaching in Buddhism about, cleanliness of your environment translate to cleanliness of your mind. And I really took that as something, because I was a very messy person. I don't like to fold clothes. I still don't, but I do. I do it now with a little bit more humility. And I remember when I was reading your book one day and you talked about being contemplative while sweeping the house. Alina really enjoys this because now I'm always sweeping.
I'm glad I had at least one beneficial thing
Right.
for your
So
family.
I find that if I can use that one activity, so like now the broom has become my pause mechanism for being contemplative. So when I grab the broom, I automatically just get in the zone and I just sweep the house with a different type of mindset. Can you talk about that, the different ways or the different modalities that people can use to become contemplative?
Yeah, I mean, there's no end to the creativity of of contemplation. So there's so many ways that you can create that custom. It's a custom, So every time you pick up the broom, you're in the space, right? But you can
Right.
do that with other things as well. So you can do it. I'm a great washer upper, so I love washing up is my thing. And sometimes I'll put music on while I'm washing up, and that just that helps me go into that space.
Mhm.
And I have a busy family with 3 kids and teenagers, and so and they're not tidy and all those things, and they need sometimes direction or, you know, and so, but you have to find contemplative ways to kind of live in environments that are kind of a bit chaotic and
Right.
spontaneous and challenges coming up all the time. So you've got to find these pauses so that you kind of remain sane, and that's what's kept me sane
Right.
as a busy father. And I'm a very hands-on father, and I always have been. I've always been at home,
Mhm.
a lot, and working with my children a lot. And I mean, sometimes I guess it drives them crazy, but they're great teachers. And so for me, like one of my sacred things is I developed an interest in like fine teas, Chinese teas.
Mhm.
And so I developed this little tea practice with these tiny little teapots and things. And I learned this from an amazing man called Master Po, who actually is a kind of Jew from New Jersey, but he lives in Oregon now, and he has a tea house there, and is an amazing man. And I was recently with him actually, and sat with him every morning, and he serves the most amazing tea. But he holds a space of love, so that every cup that he pours for you is a cup filled with love, and you totally feel it when you're with him.
Wow.
And he really, and so having met him some years ago, I realized, wow, you can do this with anything. You know, that gentleness, that precision, that lucidity.
Right.
And he also being kind of a bit of a rebel, he dispenses with a lot of the sort of rigidity around tea ceremony and stuff. It's not that. It's more of a kind of, it's about love and presence. It's not about technique. It's not about doing it right or doing it wrong, or you know, he's really taught that. He teaches that, and so you can apply that to so many things in life. That spirit of play and freedom, and the contemplative way. So, the other thing is, if you cultivate that in your daily life, you know, walking, running, you know, anything that you do, you can do it in a contemplative way. You know, and the contemplative state is very, as you probably know, it's very agreeable. It's very enjoyable because you relax. And like if you're like, I mean, one of the things is our hands. You know, if you can do something with your hands, whether it's playing an instrument or working a right brain thing with your hands, it's rather than just digital, which is kind of left brain. It really opens up pathways in the brain that allow us to deeply relax. So anything that's done with your hands, like the broom or the washing up, or, you know, because we have to do so many things with our hands, but if we don't do them with awareness and with this gentle spirit of playful contemplation, then we miss the kind of fruits of that. And I should say that, you know, well, I'll pause again because I want to let you go on. Because the second phase, there's 3 phases to contemplation. The first is pausing, you know. So, yeah, I'll pause.
Now, this is such a beautiful conversation. I remember hearing you talk about, you know, thermodynamics. It's not really a switch of topic. I'm just kind of bringing it full circle. I heard you talk about like theory of conservation of energy, chaos theory, which is entropy. Is the art of contemplation, is being contemplative, an aspect of like a universal principle? It kind of feels that way to me, but I would like to know how that fits into your dynamics of understanding the world in that way, so we can connect to those who are really stuck with the scientific, you know, thing. Because as you know, these days you have to put some scientific research behind the stuff that you're talking about for a lot more people to listen to what you're trying to say, or at least that's been my experience, whether that be in your periodicals, in what you're writing, or maybe through some of your lectures. Is that connected at all? The state of being contemplative and its connection to any universal principles?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned entropy, you know, the perceived law of entropy, you know, and I say that because science is not a fixed thing, you know, and so, you know, it's perceived. And in a way, you know, in the gene keys, entropy as a word is the actual word I use for the shadow of the very first gene key. And so in a way, it is the beginning of the universe, but seen through a certain lens. It's a universal principle that all energy moves from order to disorder, which is sort of a depressing law in a way. But it's observed, you know, within systems. That's an observed law. And you could say our mind is like that. You know, our mind can be a closed system. And when we live in a closed system way, then we create entropy. You know, we lose energy, we get tired, we actually fall into states of decay or depression, or we lose our luster, we lose our way, we lose our creativity. You know, so the gift that's hidden in that key is the gift of freshness. You know, and so when we manage to unlock entropy, you know, and you know, through opening our brain, opening our mind, opening up possibilities, you know, through gentleness, through pausing, through these sort of simple techniques, then freshness is what we find. We actually find that every moment is completely fresh. No contemplative moment is ever like the last one, because it's always fresh and we're always something. And I can't really explain that because it's a feeling, it's a felt feeling. It's like you are a creative being, and you're always new. Even on the last moment, that your last breath, you're still always new. And even after your last breath, you're new, and on and on. You're always being reborn in every. That's the law of the universe. And so, in a way, entropy. I use a lovely word in Gene Keys, syntropy. Which is a bit like entropy is a bit like looking at a black hole, right? And in a black hole, you only see the energy going in and being sucked in, and you see, like, at the core of universes and galaxies, these supermassive black holes where energy and time and space and light is sucked in, it's lost. But then what we don't see is, well, what's on the other side? And we all wonder that, don't we? In our science fiction, we're like, there must be another side. There's, if that's the black of the yang, the yin and the yang, what's the white? There must be a white hole. There must be syntropy, the law on the other side. And the law of syntropy, perhaps a law that we haven't yet discovered, is the law of free energy in the universe. It's the law that everything is interconnected with everything else and entangled. I mean, quantum physics is getting there,
right?
Where everything is connected to everything else, and everything has limitless energy potential. So entropy is only a perceived law, actually, because it's the logical mind that processes time and measures things, that sees decay. But if you move into a timeless state, which is the contemplative state, you don't have that problem. You don't have the problem of linearity. You're actually open to the infinite, and you're back to that first sentence of the Tao Te Ching.
Right.
That it cannot be put into words. It can't. And that's the nature. Contemplation is doing something that can't be put into words. So it can't be, you can measure it. You can measure someone's relaxation. You can measure their brain waves. They've done that with mindfulness and stuff like that. So you can tell that it's good for health. But what you can't see is that it opens us up to our spiritual nature.
Right.
And it does. It opens us up to our spiritual nature. That's what, and if I explain the middle part? Inside the second phase of contemplation is called pivoting. It's another word that sometimes you hear from Buddhist teachers. And so there's pausing, and then there's pivoting. And if you have in a day, let's say you have 25 pauses, and the shortest one is one of those, and the longest one might be 20 minutes just sitting, gazing at something outside, and you're really relaxed, and or you're doing a crossword or something, but then maybe that's your contemplation, because it can, you can do anything in a contemplative state, and it's time out. And so, but in those moments, that's where, in one of those moments, there's potential for a pivot, for a breakthrough, for you to see something for the first time and see it new, fresh, right? You get that freshness. You break the entropy pattern and you see something completely new in a new way. So it's called a pivot, or a pivotal moment. And those pivotal moments are when the contemplation has gone deeper inside us. And it's not, this is over like days and weeks and even months as you do the practice of pausing. It goes on deeper and deeper and deeper. And you can literally, like in my book, I say you can consciously contemplate something. So if you have PTSD, you might contemplate your trauma, right?
Right.
And in the beginning, that could be very uncomfortable. But after a while, you start to get that gentleness thing going, and you start to feel it come up in your body, and you start to envelop it in that space and that spaciousness. After a while, it starts to reveal deeper layers, and you're finding them in the pauses. So you might be doing stuff in the day, but every now and again, you find one of those pauses again. You might be brushing, and it could happen at any time that a pivot happens. And the pivot is a breakthrough. It's something from a deeper part of you opens up spontaneously, and you might sweat, you might cry for no reason, you might shout, you might feel a moment of joy, who knows, it might be sudden, it might be gentle and tremulous, it could, but when it comes, it comes. And it's a harvest of the state of contemplation. It's one of the first harvests of all those pauses. So you're not, in a way, we're not doing them to get that experience, but if you do them, that experience every now and again comes. It's a breakthrough. It's where the shadow transforms into a gift in the Gene Keys language. The shadow suddenly reveals the hidden gift underneath. And energy that was locked is released in the body through vitality. And, so that's why it can have a physical effect. And it can come out through a discharge of emotion in some way. It might come out in lots of ways. It might come out as anger. It might come out, because it might be something that's been repressed, and it suddenly comes out. And if you've created the pauses in the contemplation, then it'll come out in a safe way, for you, because you'll be able to sit with it and just feel it and feel it rocking and coming through your body. And what's happening is layers of that trauma are being slowly released from deeper. So you've got to carry on, though. So those pivotal moments are incredible. And when you look back on, if you've done 6 months of contemplation, you'll look back and you'll know those pivotal moments, because they're when things like really open for you. You're like, oh my God, my relationship changed from that moment, and it changed permanently.
I started grabbing the broom. That's what
happened. Anyway, that's the second phase. I mean, and it does, it unlock, there's a lot of other things connected to it, but it's also something you can't predict. Pauses you can control. Pivots you can't. They happen when they happen. They happen when we're not looking. Yeah.
That's such an interesting turn of phrase that you use. They happen when we're not looking.
Yeah.
There's an experiment that they do that is called the double slit experiment. I don't know if you're familiar with it, where they shoot pretty much like particles through slits, and they expect it to come out one side as particles, but when they are not looking, the particles come out as waves. It's called the double slit experiment. So literally, the act of looking at things, even at the quantum level, or not looking at them, actually changes reality itself. And that's when you were talking, that's really what was coming to me, like the art of contemplation, the art of bringing your focus and attention to even a thought or an experience or matter actually has an impact on that matter just by you bringing your awareness and attention to it. So that's kind of how I'm understanding it. You can tell me if I'm way off.
No, you're absolutely, I feel that you're spot on. I mean, absolutely right there. Yeah. And the magical thing about this contemplative way is that you're cultivating this kind of magical inner state, right? But it's already there, but you're unveiling it, and it starts to spread more into your life. And so things that you do where you're not contemplative change, right? So if you're a sports person, for example, if you're a tennis player or something, and you're doing the contemplative practice, you'll find a new level of rhythm coming into and flow and timing coming into your game, because it's there underneath. It's that magic thing that every sports person knows, for example, or if you're a business person, you will find that your mind starts to become more lucid, and that you start to see things more clearly and more quickly, and decisions become easier rather than kind of painful, like, I don't know what to do. It starts to kind of, the contemplation starts to colonize your life, and it starts to bring change, but beneficial change. So it's really, really powerful in that way. These pivotal moments kind of are like gear shifts inside us, but they're very physical. They can be very emotional. They can, they're connected often to the amygdala in the brain, because which I've described in the book as like a detonator, that detonates, that goes off when we feel unsafe. The old patterns that are kind of rooted through the neural net of fear, whether they're from our childhood or whether they're, ancestral, or whether they're, because of trauma we've suffered. The amygdala is kind of key, and it's a bit like taking out the detonator of a bomb. That's what contemplation does. It just removes the detonator, and it's become harmless. And so over time we learn that fear is safe. We learn that feeling unsafe is safe.
You learn
And,
that very
you know,
safe.
that's powerful.
Right. I felt that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, me too. So even contraction is safe, you know, and we have core contraction inside us, you know, that, but it's safe to feel it, to be in it. You know, it can't harm us, actually.
That was really
Yeah.
beautiful. You know, this is one of the problems I think about, you know, our consciousness being at pretty much, if you want to look at it like the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. If our consciousness is just based on just survival, things of that nature, we don't have a connection to the world. We don't have a connection to nature. So, of course, we become hostile in a way. That's how I'm understanding it. When I look at the world, when I see, you know, people getting bombed and blown up, when I see people going into schools and killing children, what I really see is a disconnection, you know, an inability to connect the other to the I. And I really think that in these times, especially, it could not be more important to have that connection, to have that understanding. I really think that the art of contemplation is a really powerful way to get us there. Can you talk us through that as you explain the last phase of being contemplative?
Totally. Thank you for setting that up so nicely. Yeah, the third phase is I call merging. So it's very simple. It's always three things. It's, you know, it's the pause, the pivot, and then the merge. You know, the insight, the breakthrough, and then the final is called the epiphany. You know, and so these are like, you know, if you have 25 pauses in a day, maybe one of those might be a pivot, right? Might be. And if you have, you know, if you go on doing those pauses, then, you know, 25 pivots add up to like one merge, you know, one merging epiphany.
Right.
And an epiphany is when the contemplative practice gets right down to the physical layer. You know, so it goes from mental to emotional to physical. So it's going deeper, and it actually gets right into the cells, and it triggers that light in the DNA that I spoke of at the very beginning. You know, it actually unlocks that light because they're photons, right? And so it kind of releases that light back into, and so we have experiences where we experience what I call merging, whereas we have a connection, a wider connection to the field through our hearts, through love. Essentially, what we're feeling is deep, unconditional love, or it might come as forgiveness, or it might come as any one of those city words, peace. It might come as, you know, there's 64 words in the Gene Keys. You can pick any one. They're all like epiphany moments or epiphany experiences, epiphany states of merging with the whole. And once one of them is like, it's like a whole part of the fabric of the illusion of our separateness, a whole kind of aspect of that fabric. It's like we're a tapestry, and a whole bit of the fabric just falls away. It's like, oh my God. And you look, and beyond it is the great void of connection to everything. You know, is the everything. And so it's like the fabric of our illusion of our separateness begins to dissolve and drop away in sort of big bunches. And those are merging. They might not come as moments. They might come as sort of, you know, week-long kind of physical, could be even an illness, you know, that it comes as, that kind of purges us and opens our DNA, literally, where a pattern or a trauma or a paradigm that's been a contraction in us kind of is burned white hot from our DNA, or is just dropped by the intensity of the awareness of our self-love, you know, of our self-care, finally gets right through to the core of our being. You know, those photons of our light, of our kind of practice, just get right through to the core of our being, and something goes off. You know, it could be gentle and subtle, or it could be thunderous. You know, for some people it's one, others, you know, it's gentle, and a lot of the time it's quite subtle, in my experience. But sometimes, you know, when I've witnessed someone have one of those moments, it can come as a sort of, a lot of tears might come for some people because there's a release of like relief. It's like a relationship that hasn't been working for 20 years. Suddenly there's forgiveness, and there's this kind of reunion, and there's this kind of, why have we been like this? It's a whole part of the illusion just drops away. And you're like, what were we thinking? And those, they can appear as miracles,
Right.
but actually they're just the tension dropping away on its own. So I can't express to people, how magical this little thing is, because it's so simple. And if all you've got to do, so all you actually got to do is create pauses. You don't have to understand the rest. You just do that. That's enough. And everything else happens. The pivots happen. The merging happens. You just create the pauses. I mean, I can't distill it any simpler than that. But it's nice to hear about the magic. What happens is being kind of erupts in us, states of being, where sometimes thoughts drop away, sometimes the heart just opens, sometimes music pours through our being, sometimes new creative urges just come into us, all from just taking some pauses. You begin. You can, anyone listening to this, you can begin today. You could create one pause, just one in this day. And when you get to bed, just do a creative something lovely. Just do something differently, but do it in the spirit of what I'm talking about. Self-care, gentleness, deep self-acceptance and self-forgiveness. And even if it only lasts for a few minutes, when you come to the end of your day, that will be a resonant memory, that moment. And then maybe the next day you'll do too, and then you'll start to increase them.
Wow.
So merging is amazing. It's where it does get mystical in a way, but it's also, it can be very mundane. It can be very simple things as well.
Right. It's just beautiful how you're describing it. It sounds to me kind of how I feel about a practice that I do when I teach, called the 22 minutes to balance. And there's 10 minutes of chanting or mantra during that time. And it doesn't happen to me all the time, but I notice that there are times when I'll do my chanting and I'll start the timer to do the 10 minutes of chanting, and then the timer will go off again. And I will look and the 10 minutes disappeared. Where did I go? What happened? Did my phone not work? I have no clue what happens during that time. I can't explain it, but somehow the words or the mantras or the movement and everything becomes nothing. And just there you are. And it just bypasses kind of like that. And I have an inordinate amount of energy that comes out of that practice. It seems it's something super simple. Just do it in a specific sequence. But I've never actually thought of contemplation in the same way, but that's really how you're describing what I felt or what I feel doing that practice.
Yeah, it sounds like you experienced, some of that merging field, I mean, the other thing I'd say is, just so people don't think that this is all kind of all love and light and peace, that contemplation can also, it has a trickster energy to it, and that's the creative part of it. That's the part that's sort of a little bit rebellious to the mindfulness community. It's a little bit more rebellious, so, and experimental. So in my book, I give a lot of, at the back, there's lots of little kind of fun exercises that are suggested and ways of applying contemplation to different things in life. And some of the ones I love are the urban ones, where you set aside some time to deliberately go somewhere that's usually stressful, or usually really not a pleasant experience for you. But you go there with no reason. So you might go to the supermarket, right? And you go to the supermarket where normally you're just like, you've got to get down your list and get it done and then get out, right? But you go there with the art of contemplation under your belt, as a way. And so you might go there and you could either sit in there or you could walk around quietly with no purpose. You could even pick up a basket, fill it up, and then put it back. But the point is that you take yourself into that environment in the contemplative state, and you're an actor, and you're there for play. And what happens when you do that? I mean, I've done it in airports, train stations, all the places where sometimes things are ramped up, and you get in. One of the things that I did in the early days is got into queues. I'd get in a queue and I'd just stand in the queue with no purpose, and I'd wait and I'd get to the front and then I'd just walk off. And it's a lot of fun because we don't generally like queuing, humans, but actually if you queue in the contemplative state, it's really blissful because you feel kind of naughty. You're like an actor. You're the actor there, and there's a sort of delight in that energy, and you're breathing deeply, and you look around and you see other people are nervous and they're impatient and they're sort of looking at their watches, but you're kind of just there to bring the state, and you might even emanate some of that state to them,
right.
And they might catch it, and you might have a conversation,
right, passing it off.
Yeah. And so there's a trickster nature to it where you can experiment, and really, like I in supermarkets, I don't do it so much anymore, but I used to go and sit in a supermarket and just go into really deep states of just my eyes shut, and I'd literally clear out the whole supermarket of people and I'd empty it like it was there at night. And I'd just be in the absolute silence, and it was really exquisite.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Richard, we could be here all day long. I love. We talked about this before. That's why I asked you about the time to make sure you didn't have other things going on, because I could talk to you for the entire day. But I think it's important, to make sure that people know where to find you, where to find the book, where to find your course, and we'll put everything down in the comments below. Could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's very easy. If you're interested in the art of contemplation, you can get the little book on Amazon, and that's a good start. And also, I've done a little audio course with it, which is on my. So if you go to genekeys.com, if you go to courses and scan down, there's quite a few courses. It's about the fourth one down, and it's only $45, but basically what I've done is I've read the book. You get the book, and then there's me reading the book in sections. So you can kind of download it and you can have it in sections, and there's me taking you through it in sort of bite-sized chunks. And then there's also little exercises and things, and nice pictures, and it has a few really nice meditations with music, just to kind of lull you into the contemplative state. And that's a really nice little mini course. I really recommend it. It's very popular. And that, alongside the book, is a great place to start exploring the art of contemplation. And also on genekeys.com, you find all the other stuff to do with Gene Keys, and you can explore your profile if you're very bold and adventurous, and all the programs that wrap around that. And so there's loads of things there. And you'll also find my, Gene Keys YouTube channel, where I've done all kinds of talks on all kinds of things, and interviews. So that's also a good place to find out more.
Richard, we're going to stay connected. For those of you that have been on the live, thank you so much for joining us. Please remember that you don't need to be improved. All that you need is already within you. Love you guys.